Okay, so welcome all. It's a wonderful evening today. We have Anupam Da amongst us, and he will be talking about his experience as a career with a career in academia. And we all know how difficult and how time taking it is. And so he will be trying to simplify how this journey can be made for everyone and those who are interested in it. Uh, just a brief introduction about Anupam Da. He is currently a professor of biological physics at the University of Luxembourg. He heads the Physics of Living Matter group, a cross-disciplinary team of scientists working on emergent functionalities in biological systems. Uh, re- Research in the Anupam Da's lab spans soft and living matter physics, microfluids, optics, and microbiology. Anupam Da holds a BTech and MTech degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Bombay and a PhD in physics for his thesis on liquid crystal microfluidics carried out at the Max Planck Institute for Dynamics and Self-Organization in Germany in 2013. His doctoral work is a recipient of the Glenn H. Brown Prize from the International Liquid Crystal Society, the Springer Thesis Award, and the Berliner Ungeter Prize in 2013. So, uh, as a postdoc at MIT, Anupam Das switched fields to integrate engineering and physics to study biological systems. He held a human frontier cross-disciplinary fellowship awarded by the International Human Frontier Science Program Organization and was selected as one of the 6 promising young scientists for future by Nature during the 65th Lindau meeting for Nobel laureates in Lindau, Germany. Currently, he is a member of the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Luxembourg and, among other roles, serves as the Director of Physics Studies of University of Luxembourg. So that is quite a long and illustrious CV to talk about. And so today, without much ado, I think we should give the stage to Anupam Da to share his experience about his journey, a 2 decade journey in academia. So I think Anupam Da, I think you should start now.
Thanks, Satyam. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
thanks, Satyam. Yeah, you have said it all, so I do not have to say anything. We can directly get into the Adda. I see Rajarshi is here. Rajarshi, hello. আশা করি শুনতে পাচ্ছিস. It's great that you could join from our batch.
Hey Anupam, how are you, man?
Good. It's been what, 7-8 years. We met in Boston last time.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so I wasn't sure how our composition for Adda would be today, so I kind of kept it a bit fluid. So maybe we will start with a brief, let's say, kind of a discussion on what it is about academia, and at some point I will quickly switch to a very short presentation about specifically what my group does, but that's not what is really important today. What is important today is academic world, and Rajesh can confirm, he has seen a bit of it himself. It's getting tougher and it's a very steep uphill task. Having said that, it's not an impossible task, but one has to prepare, right? So gone are the days when scientists were scientists because they used to just love science. These days, there are way too many exceedingly talented, hardworking researchers, but unfortunately, the number of positions and opportunities are somewhat limited compared to the number of, let's say, eligible candidates. And that brings us to the demand and supply problem, right? Before I get into this, a big thanks to Riteshda, Satyam, and the whole organizing team for this platform. I really enjoyed also this time leading up to this discussion. I was absolutely impressed to see this is really, the background work is done really at a very professional level. I was thinking more, okay, maybe a few days before the talk, it would be, I have to send a kind of an overview and all, but it really, there is a proper preparation. And also you see it in the announcements, it's all very well planned. And I think it's great that this is happening in this way. And I should also especially thank Riteshda for looping me back into RKMV circle in a way, because since Riteshda moved to Luxembourg, it kind of reignited my links with RKM. I understand when left to me, I am not a very expressive person. I will prefer to be quiet, but I think Riteshda knows how to trigger people and get them speaking. And so here I am. And yes, so it's been also wonderful that over these last many months that since Riteshda moved to Luxembourg, we have had opportunities to also catch up socially here in Luxembourg. Also at a broader level, we had our reunion in Germany, in Saarbrücken, not too far from Luxembourg, where I saw many of us from Vidyapit who are currently in different parts of Europe. And I was very impressed to see that many of our juniors, they are not deterred by the general perception of a very tough academic world. They have taken up the challenge to really get into the academic world. They are at very well recognized academic institutions in Europe. Some of them have started their doctoral studies. Some of them, they are at their postdoc. Some of them are even graduating to the next stage to look for their own independent position. And I think having seen this phase over the last few years, this is what I would like to share today, that maybe how we could, I would not say how we could prepare, because there is no fixed recipe, but maybe we could check a few boxes which would allow us to enhance our chances of rewarding academic life, let's say. So very briefly, I was in Vidyapit from 1993 till 1999. Rajarshi, who is here, I think Rajarshi started in 1992, a year before me. So, and my, let's say, I think we used to have I forgot the word. We used to have a guide who used to a senior. So that was Eknath Bose. Huh? How was the name? How did we call Rajarshi? That
I think you're
like,
right. It's just guide.
Guide, huh? So that was Eknath for me, and my first dham was Vigyanan Dham. That's where my first friends, if I remember, it was Buddha, Prasun. Prasun was our dham sevak at the time. And then, of course, others joined, and I had a bit of round of all the dhams, and it was wonderful. Fun fact from our batch, I do not know why I was selected, but I was the Shiva for the Shivaratri. And this was a lot of fun. So there was also Ranjan and Pratyush and Supriyo Devnath from my batch, who is now in the Netherlands. And it was a lot of fun preparing for the Tandava. I did not know that you sweat so profusely when you do this Tandava, because there was a lot of makeup on my face, and halfway through the Tandava, all the makeup was gone, and I was dipping this white and black paints throughout. So this was a bit unexpected. So after my Vidyapit class 10, so at that time, I remember the new building outside the campus, it was just coming up. We only heard in the vineyard that, oh, there will be class 11th and 12th. There weren't none. But I think it was a couple of years later that we had the senior section had come up. And I directly after Vidyapit, I moved on to DPS in Bokaro. And I had, I loved biology, I should say, but then what I wasn't, let's say I could not manage well was to memorize stuff. And early on, I realized that biology is something where you need to also memorize a bit. So at that time, I preferred to, let's say, go more into the physics, maths direction. And also during my time at DPS Bokaro, I was then getting trained for the JEE entrance exams. And by the grace of Thakurma Swamiji, I got through, and then I could get into IIT Bombay in the dual degree. So those of you know the IIT structure, there is this option of integrated bachelor's, master's, and so, you know, this is so far it's a very typical trajectory. Any, let's say, aspiring student from India. And once I was in IIT, I had a bit of, let's say, I could take a step back and try to analyze what am I doing, not in a very structured way, but one of the things that Vidyapit had introduced me pretty early on was into teaching. I remember when I was in class 7, 8, 9, I was very happily going to Balakendra and teaching the students. So thanks to Shuken Maharaj, who was doing these activities. But for me, the prize was once in a while you get to step out of the boundaries of the Vidyapit, see the external world a bit, and then come back. But I think that really instilled the seed in me to teach and to like this whole field of teaching and academia, which then continued during my time at IIT Bombay, because I remember with the support of one of our senior professors at IIT Bombay, we set up for the first time an organization which is thriving now. It's called Unnati. So I think we all know the meaning of Unnati. And this organization which we set up, this started as a charitable, let's say, teaching and education option for the kids and the wives of our non-teaching staffs, because also in IIT we had hostels, and there were many who were, let's say, living right outside the campus, and their children needed support. And this gave rise to Unnati, with which I was pretty closely involved at the time. And then by the time I left IIT Bombay, I think it's great to see Unnati still continues. And then, as it is common in IIT that you get offered pre-placement positions. And the offers that I had were mostly from banking and management. And these were really some of the leading places that you can think of. I do not know, I was maybe naive, or I was too attached to the scientific world. I did not take the offers which I had from these big consulting and banking companies. Instead, I decided to join a startup in Germany, where I had done a part of my master's thesis while I was a student at IIT Bombay, because part of my master's thesis I spent in Germany at the time, and that I was still, I think, attached a bit to the technical world. So that got me to Germany, and I was working in Germany for about in this company for close to about a year, at which point I think I was getting too comfortable to a cozy life in industry. And I do not know, I think I was missing a challenge, or it was just a bug in me which said, okay, time to move on. And this has been pretty much what has kept happening over the last 20 some years. There isn't a single place after Vidyapit where I have spent more than 5 years on average, right? So there has been a constant move. And so I left the company and joined the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen, shifting from engineering to fundamental physics. And I should confess, the early days were not easy because as an engineer, you have very different take on a problem than as a physicist, as a fundamental scientist. And I think the first 6-8 months, it was a lot of asking myself, was this a good move, and so on and so forth. But then it took me this, let's say, gestation period to fall in love with physics. And I was also very fortunate to have advisors who gave me the necessary freedom to explore my abilities and interests, I mean, in the academic world, but also come to my rescue when they saw that, let's say, I was finding it hard to keep my head above the water. And so by the time I was wrapping up my PhD, I was, again, thanks to the freedom that my advisors had allowed me, I had a few publications, the number of which were not, let's say, common for a typical PhD graduating student. So that kind of bolstered my confidence. Oh, could academia be an option for me moving forward? Frankly, till then, this was not in picture at all. Thereafter, again, what kept happening all this time was I was still very closely associated with teaching. My love for teaching, which started in Balakendra, continued in IIT Bombay, then continued during my PhD, where I was tutoring different courses, some of which even in German, with my very limited German abilities at the time. And by the time I was graduating, one of my well-wishers and also I would personally consider him also my mentor, he advised me to give it a shot at this fellowship. It's called the Human Frontiers Fellowship. Those of you in academia, you might be aware of that. It's an extremely competitive international fellowship. But there was a very interesting category of the fellowship, which is called the cross-disciplinary fellowship, which allows people with absolutely no background in biology to make this transition. And as I mentioned early on, biology was always, thanks to Pandita maybe, I used to love biology. But the thing was, equally, I used to dislike memorizing. And this was then the nice serendipitous link which happened through Human Frontiers, that with my quantitative skills, here came an opportunity where I could possibly involve my or use my quantitative skills in understanding biology. And so I applied for this fellowship, and again, by blessings of everyone, it went through, and that took me to MIT in the US. 2014 January. I was absolutely not prepared for the blizzards. I thought I have seen cold weather in Europe, because if some of you who have been in Europe during, let's say, 2009 to 2012, there were some pretty severe winters where entire Europe was completely decked with snow. And I thought I had my share of snowfalls and so on. And I reach Boston and there is a blizzard, and I've never seen cities come to standstill in that magnitude. The university is closed, schools are closed, buses don't work. So that was, again, culturally, it was very new. But again, the other completely new dimension was getting exposed to an academic culture that I think I had always dreamt to be in, but it was so distinct from what we have experienced back in India, or what we experience in India, or for that matter, the way academia works in Europe, than it is in IIT. It's extremely enriching. It's extremely dynamic. I never thought I would need a smartphone because somehow I was pretty happy with my old Nokia, and I thought I could do well with it. But within first 2 weeks of my time at MIT, I realized I was missing out on appointments and meetings and discussions because everything is so dynamic. Things get almost in real time. There is a shuffling of you have to be always in the loop in real time, and so I had my first smartphone after reaching Boston, and this smartphone is still with me, and it's still functioning, I would say. So during this time at MIT, I think this was the MITians love to put it this way: drinking water from a fire hose. You know what a fire hose from the fire brigade people? It's a huge gush of water. And if you want to drink water, most of it will fall through, but you will still get some water, which is more than sufficient. And I think this is what the whole MIT experience was for me. There is absolutely so much happening, and one has to be very selective about what you pick. But also, even from what you want to pick, you have everything. And then 2 stations on the red line, you have Harvard. And that is another very, let's say, enriching environment. And what was also very surprising to me, despite all the perceptions that there is a tussle between MIT and Harvard, I was very happily surprised to say this tussle is underpinned by very strong collaborations. And some of my first invited talks back there was from Harvard University. And I developed very interesting, I would say, and very long-term association with my peers back then at Harvard, who are now at different places, also leading their own groups. So this time was very enriching, and I should mention that's where I was reconnecting a bit back with Rajarshi. And a few months after I moved to Boston, then Buddhaditya, who was also my batchmate, I think he joined Harvard University. And yeah, it was a nice catching up with some of us in Vidyapith at the time. But my stay was a bit cut short. I was, let's say, this Human Frontiers Fellowship was supposed to be for 3 years, but the lab I was working at the time, it was then, the lab was relocating to ETH Zurich in Switzerland. Now, this was an interesting phase for me at a personal level because, since I moved from physics and engineering to biology, and that to experimental biology, you have to invest a lot of time and effort before you start to see the fruit. And for me, I think the fruit was starting to appear, and then was this decision that the lab is now moving. So this was a very tricky bit, and this is also something I learned along my journey, that there will be unexpected, in fact, sometimes somewhat even could even take you back a bit. These events will happen on which you hardly have any control. But that's absolutely not a reason to complain or to feel depressed or discouraged. It's just another opportunity. The reason I'm saying it's another opportunity, it's because moving back to Europe, well, the reason I say Switzerland is in Europe because it's still mainland Europe. It's not in the European Union, but it's in the mainland Europe. So this was an unexpected reintegration back to the academic network where I had done my PhD. So most likely, if I would have continued in the US, completed my 3 years of fellowship at MIT, I would have most likely maybe even found an academic position in the US. But here I was back in Europe a little earlier than expected. And then, but this of course took, put a somewhat, I would not say a halt, but it decelerated some of my, let's say, academic plans in the sense that such a transcontinental move, it's always time taking. So during my PhD, I remember in Göttingen, we moved campuses from city center to top of a hill. And that itself had put a hold on our research for a couple of months. And now we were moving continents. And imagine at the time my work involved working with algae. Algae are these photosynthetic organisms which produce the oxygen, 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. And these algae that I was working with, they were grown in natural seawater, which we used to collect from the Boston shores, from little outside Boston. Now then we were moving to a country which is landlocked. There is no ocean. So what that would mean is there was no chance you will get natural seawater to grow your cells. You had to move everything to artificial seawater. And anyone who is in research, in biological research, you might know that such a drastic change in the growth conditions would require you to repeat all your experiments to make sure what you have seen so far are still consistent. So here was 2 years of work. Again, restart, but what can we do? You do it with a smile on your face and hope for the best. And hoping for the best at that time, again, completely unexpected. I was approached by now my colleagues here in Luxembourg, inquiring if I would be interested to consider a position here. Of course, at the time, when they first approached, I was very grateful for this, because it doesn't happen often that you are being probed for your interest to join as a faculty member. But despite that, I had to say no when they first approached, which I did. And I really thought it through. For me, at that time, the priority was the following. I had consciously decided to move from physics and engineering to biology. And I was at a very critical juncture where, let's say, a breakthrough was in sight. And if I did not pursue that at that time, I would not know when I would have been able to come back at it and complete it and bring it to a logical conclusion. Because setting up a group, especially an experimental group, it's a time-taking process, not just for the research reasons, but also logistically and so on. So for those of you who are considering a independent research position, I think it's important, if you are close to a major breakthrough, I think it's important that prioritizing that breakthrough and then moving on. But I think I was very grateful to my current colleagues here, and when I politely wrote to them, and they said, okay, then maybe we will come back in a year, and generally no one comes back. And I was very fortunate and happy when they came back again. At that time, I had a few other offers, and that's when I seriously started to consider whether to move to Luxembourg or not. Now, with this kind of a background, in 2018, then actually I got the position in 2017, but there were still a few pending research from my postdoctoral time going on in Zurich, which I then finished. And then in 2018, I moved here and started my lab. So I've put together a very short couple of slides just to give you an overview of what my lab does. But again, as I mentioned, this is absolutely not the point of today's discussion. After this, I would like to come back to these 3 E's that I thought of discussing with you, which is about the evidence, ethics, and endurance. And then maybe we can open up the session for a chat and discussion. So, so Satyam and Ritesda, if it's okay, could I share the slides briefly?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's just see. Do you see that?
Yes, it's visible to us.
Yeah, so if you see, it's a hodgepodge in some sense. And that's because we work on different fields, but the core of which is still physics and engineering. So we have a very quantitative take on biological systems. I was very happy to hear Pushpendra is here. He is also on the applied side of biotechnology, which is very interesting. Also, some of us in my team, we are looking into some of these. So, of course, eventually we could also discuss a bit. And Rajarshi, I think, yeah, I should not speak much about biology in front of you because you are the real guy here. But broadly speaking, what we do is we typically work with a variety of cell types. It could be prokaryotes, which are very simple organisms like bacteria, which do not even have nucleus, or little higher up eukaryotes, which have a nucleus, but still single cells like algae. Algae are these green photosynthetic organisms. And more recently, we got into the field of cancer biophysics, where we are looking at how cancer develops and is some of the, let's say, the properties of cancer and its development is regulated by bacterial colonies, which are associated with some cancer types. And these are called cancer microbiome. On the right-hand side, you will see terms which are more related to physics. There is complex matter, there is fluids, fluid mechanics, microfluidics. This is more on the physics side of things. And what my lab does is it brings in tools and techniques from physics to understand living systems, right? And in doing so, we often touch upon some bigger questions, more broader questions on ecology, evolution. Most of the problems and the questions that we tackle in my team, they have an overarching, let's say, question which relates to climate change and human health. So more specifically, the role of microbiome in and how that is evolving due to changing lifestyles and habits that we have. So we are a rather diverse team, both in terms of demography, but also in terms of themes. So in my team, we have on one side, we have physicists and engineers, but also on other side, we have core biologists, chemists, mathematicians. So we are really a very interdisciplinary group. This is a somewhat older picture. Maybe you can guess it from the length of my hair. Now it's touching, yeah, my back. So at that time, it was still my neck. But yeah, so it's almost a 50-50 split over here. 50% of my team are PhD students, 50% they are postdoctoral students. So they have finished their PhD, and we are supported by administration for logistic purposes and also a lab manager. Yeah, so personally, I think we have been through it, but what I wanted to focus over here is the funding situation. So we are mm, lucky to be very generously funded in the last 4 years. We secured about 10 million euro since I started over here. So 1 million, I think 1 million is 10 lakhs. Rajeshri, 1 million is 10 lakhs or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have about 10 million, but then this is split across different projects, but we are rather internationally funded by different organizations, most of which comes from Luxembourg. So it's the Luxembourg National Research Fund, but also there are European funds, and Human Frontiers still supports us with continuation of different postdoctoral positions. And also some more recently, the Institute of Advanced Studies, they are supporting us with the cancer research that we got into. So broadly, in terms of physics, we study what is known as active matter, but we focus on microbial active matter. And typically what we look at is how form, by form, it could be shape, it could be external shape, internal shape, and flow. Flow could mean literally flow of, let's say, matter, for example, like inside a cell, how a liquid flows, or flow of molecules, how different molecules are transported, because these are key for signaling purposes, but also flow of information, right? And how flow and form come together to give rise to biological function. So one of the key focus areas for us is, it's not really looking at a system at a given time point, but understanding the system in the framework of what is known as emergent phenomena. So there's a growing recognition that living systems are able to thrive and adapt because they can dynamically change their attributes depending upon both external factors or their environment and other neighbors who coexist with them, right? And that's why, although the theoretical aspect has been there for some time, but it's only very recently that we are starting to get, let's say, real evidence, thanks to high-end, let's say, imaging and quantitative image analysis techniques, some of which we extensively applied in my team. So this is just to, in a nutshell, give you an idea of the different kinds of research systems we are working on. So if you look at the top left, what you see is a bacterial colony, which is growing in time. So each of these small rods, these are bacterial colony. And I would like to draw your attention on the scale bar. It's just 5 microns. So if you look at your hair, the width of your hair is about 100 microns. So 5 micron is 1/20th the width of your hair. So by no means we see bacteria by naked eye, but through some high resolution imaging, you can not only see them, but you can also see how one bacteria grows and divides over time, and then that could give rise to infections and so on, right? Now, this is important for different reasons. So some of these bacterial colonies, not just a single species, but many of them, many different species and types, they inhabit our gut. So, you know, we sometimes say the gut feeling. So actually our gut is inhabited by trillions of them. And they, as of today's current science, they are considered as an independent autonomous organ by itself. It's the most recent organ, I believe. And gut has implications on so many aspects of our health and physiology. Your mood swings, your ability to remember, implications on neurodegenerative diseases, implications on your, let's say, gastrointestinal abilities. So it's a gut microbiome which influences. However, what is missing is a quantitative approach, which really brings out the mechanistic aspects. And this is where, let's say, some of our work comes in. More recently, it has been shown that some of these microbes or microbiome, so because it's a collection of different microbes, they are also associated with some cancer types, for example, colorectal cancer. And then these microbes can determine the fate of the cancer, if this is metastatic or not. And these are some of the questions we tend to ask in our lab and address them. On top right, what you see, these are some of these photosynthetic cells which are swimming, which are typically found in oceans or lakes. And they are the major contributor of, let's say, they take up carbon dioxide from environment and give back oxygen. So they are extremely important. However, due to changes in the climatic conditions, they are undergoing a massive restructuring. Yet we do not know how the future of our oceans would look like. So in our lab, and also sometimes combining field experiments, we zoom into these organisms at the level of single cell, at the level of populations, but also at the level of subcellular entities. We try to understand how changing their environmental conditions influences them. And then we study them one species at a time, but nature has thousands of species. So here comes some of the machine learning techniques we use to predict, let's say, future outcomes if let's say, the climate deterioration persists for years to come. When we combine these, of course, these topics are of fundamental importance because a lot of this is unknown. But what is also important is these also lead us to some potential applications. And these applications, often these are, I would say, it's not known a priori. We do not have an application in mind where we want to go. But it's just a natural fallout, and we are a bit opportunistic to track different parameters. So the data sets we get, these are extremely multidimensional. And some of these then allow us to also harness these responses from these microorganisms towards biotechnological applications. So we are recently developing, we have developed a material which is a byproduct of these environmental, let's say, fluctuations and the impact on these organisms, which seems to be a very potential biomaterial that could be relevant for a wide variety of consumer products, from washing powders to fabrics to tires and so on. So most likely in about a year or two from now, we would be also spinning off a company in this direction. So if there is interest in some of you to help out, either on the scientific part or in more on the managerial aspects of the company, feel free to contact me. Good. This was I do not know if you have seen, but if you just search it up, we have a small, some years back. This is an old video. This was when I had just started. Again, you can see it from the length of my hair. This is when I had started my position. So they had done a profile of my team. The team was much smaller at the time, but you can certainly visit. It's on YouTube, and it's a bit the early phase of our lab, but it gives a good overview of the key directions we follow and also the key techniques we put into use. So I think if you just put FNR Attract Fellows, Anupam, then it will come up. So I would like to end this presentation with a short video to show that it's not all hard work. It's also a lot of fun, because some of these experiments we also take to unearthly situations. For example, here we are in a microgravity flight where we are studying the impact of hyper and microgravity on some of our phytoplankton, on some of our algae. And this is a direction which is becoming extremely popular these days, thanks to some of these billionaires who want to explore space as the next habitat now that the Earth is dwindling. Having said that, there is a certain scientific merit.
I'm okay with taking the hints, but I will explain it.
Hi, Bimal. So, so there is a growing interest in some of our research that we do with microorganisms in outer space, both under microgravity conditions, but also under hypergravity conditions. And the reason for that is since humans and microbes are inseparable, before thriving human settlement is a reality in planets like Mars and so on, one has to fully understand what are the implications of such non-terrestrial gravity conditions on human health. So in fact, there is this huge field of astrobiology that looks at different aspects. So microbes and human, that's only a very tiny portion. There's all these, if you closely look next to me, my colleagues, they have their virtual goggles on because their study was also very interesting. What is the role of entertainment in microgravity? So are we equally entertained on Earth as we are entertained in a microgravity condition? So there's this whole both psychological, physiological, and biological aspect of microgravity. And of course, you get to experience low gravity conditions. So I'll just keep the presentation here and I'll stop the sharing. So I'll now just come to, let's say, the final part of this short presentation I wanted to, and that is about the 3 E's. So I think, I do not know, I think it could be most relevant for those of us from the Praktani who are in the early stages of academic ladder, let's say, +2 PhD, postdocs, and seriously thinking about a career in academia. Of course, I should mention you can never be too serious about academia because it's a very insecure path. So having alternatives is always welcome, but that should not come at the price of your excitement and love for science. So often we mistake having alternatives, meaning we are rejecting our primary aspirations. That should not be the case. But having alternatives is always, I would say, imperative. The point is, I think it's most likely during the final stages of your PhD or your early stages of postdoc, you will, I think, get a call if academia, you are cut for academia. If that's the case, that's when these, let's say, some of these checkboxes matter. So one is evidence. By evidence, I mean, of course, there's this whole aspect of research evidence and scientific evidence, data and all, but then evidence also encompasses evidence of your abilities. So that would mean when you are going to a conference, when you are presenting your work, it's not just the work you present, but people do pay attention to how you present. Are you paying attention to details? So a very wise mind once told me, every talk you give in a conference, take it as a potential job interview, because you never know who is sitting in the audience and could be interested in your profile, and that's a very I think well taken advice, I would say. Endurance is key. So even during some of you who plan to do PhD, it's not even a marathon. In a marathon, you know you have to have stamina, you know your finishing line, but with a PhD, you know in terms of time when you need to finish, but often scientifically, it could keep opening up new questions. And in fact, that's a mark of a good research thesis. A research thesis is good. You know, it's a good research thesis if it opens up new directions, if it opens up new avenues, rather than closing some. And that's why if in the course of your academic pursuit, you are running out of breath because you are not able to come to conclusions, it's a very strong signature that what you are pursuing is of quite a high value. Because if there are no answers yet, that means it's a problem of high stake, it's a high impact problem. And that's why it becomes important that we all endure through it. And there will be days and times when things are not going as planned, and there will be ups and downs, but it's really important to have, let's say, friends who could then take care, or if you prefer it to take it easy and by yourself, then yeah, a bit of detaching, taking a step back and assessing always helps. But it's absolutely common to have these phases, especially later on in the PhD. So there's nothing to worry about. The other aspect about endurance is in the next stage of your career. You are done with your PhD, you are as a postdoc, maybe you are a senior postdoc and looking for opportunities to be an independent researcher. And that's where, again, endurance plays. And that's because when we are starting to apply for positions in academia, it's highly unlikely that the first job you apply for, you will get it. There's nothing to take personally about it, because it's never about your abilities or your CV, but it's mostly about very minor details, which then make a difference who got the job and who did not. And I think in that case, it's very useful that you take this as it's, let's say, a warm-up exercise before you really do the heavy lifting. And this, of course, trains you for those jobs which you are really interested in. So even if there are job openings where, you know, it's not the ideal job, ideal place, ideal scenario for you, but I would suggest go ahead, apply, and use it, the whole experience as a learning process, because that would help us prepare for the main job interview where we are really interested, right? So that always pays, I would say, in terms of endurance. And finally, I think, again, I would like to keep discussing this in the question answer session. I think what is important is ethics. Ethics is a slippery slope because we all have different versions and definitions of ethics. But I think in academic world, ethics is very clearly defined, right? And this is ethics about ethical with the work that you do in terms of data generation and publication, and how you are presenting, how you have collected the data. Especially if you're working with human samples, then ethics plays a major role. So most of the projects need to be approved by some ethics committee and so on. And the reason I bring up this ethics is because, not because of these downstream processes where you are collecting data, but more in the upstream process where you are finally publishing data. I do not know if you have heard of this dedicated website. It's called Retraction Watch. So those of you who are in academia, in research, you might be aware. And as surprising as it is these days, so what this website does is it archives all the papers which were retracted from different peer-reviewed journals. Peer-reviewed journals, that's the ultimate currency of your academic success. Of course, you need to do other things and so, but your academic merit is evaluated based on your peer-reviewed publication. But very unfortunately, in the last decade or so, there has been a major rise in the publications which get retracted. So retraction means they were published in journals, some of which are extremely renowned and well-known journals. They were retracted because people who were following up on this research later on, they found that there were some deliberate fabrication of data. That's one reason, or deliberate, let's say, misinterpretation of data. It's mostly deliberate, which triggers this retraction. And that brings us to this whole aspect of ethics. So remember, science, whenever we are doing science, and fortunately so, if we are able to do science, at the end, it's the taxpayers' money which allows us to do science, right? Especially if it's funded by national agencies. In some cases, private organizations also fund, but at the end of the day, it's a public property in some sense. So we have all good reasons to give back what is really correct and true and not fabricate the data in any way. And the reason people fabricate the data is, of course, it gets me back to where I started. These days, there are way too many talented and hardworking researchers who want to secure their dream academic job, but there are not enough positions there. And that sometimes triggers deviation. And that's why for those of us who have been fortunate to be on the other side of this world, mentoring becomes very important. Like what your PhD student or postdoc does, it has to go through a particular process where you know that the data which is there, it's really original data, genuine data. There is no fabrication in the data. But I could go into details and also discuss this. But eventually, once we have these, the track record, it's your evidence of your abilities, your perseverance and patience, which can be summed up in endurance, and finally ethics. Then comes the fourth E, which I did not mention in the title, and that's elation. Because it's the combination of these three E's that can get you to the fourth E. And kid you not, I think academia is one of those jobs which is difficult to achieve, but once you achieve, you decide what you do, you decide how you do, and that's why it also becomes very responsible that we all do it ethically and properly. Okay, so with that, I would like to end today and maybe start the session for discussion. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Anupam. So now we can take questions from the audience, if any. So I will start first. Actually,
Sure.
I have one query. One thing, now that you have seen situation both in India, US, and multiple countries, I have a simple query that where does India lack in terms of scientific research? Is it the funding part, or the environment in the university campuses, or maybe even during PhDs, the kind of fellowship that the government offers here, that's a GRA fellowship, is hardly 35,000. So barely enough to manage yourself, not enough for a whole family you can manage with that fellowship. So what are the things that uh, what are the steps that should be taken in India to incentivize more students to take up uh, uh, proper scientific research. Nowadays, what happens? People take admission in PhD, but they keep on looking for other avenues, maybe prepare for some government exam. But no, those people who would like to stay in academia, for them the incentives in India are maybe lacking. So what all things may be done in India to promote them?
Great. I think that's a very nice question. Thanks, Satyam. Maybe before I try to maybe discuss this again, I cannot guarantee there is a solution, but maybe we could introspect a bit here. Coming to academia for financial gains is first thing, let's say, we should keep outside the table, right? I believe all of us, anyone who is in academia, they came to academia because they were passionate about it. They felt this is their calling, and so I believe as long as it's not coming in the way of your subsistence, of course we all have to have the bare minimum that would allow us to live, and maybe if you have a family, take care of your family. If that is not sufficient, then I think maybe one has to really switch from academia. But I believe what I've heard from my friends and colleagues back in India, it's been really long that I have followed up what's really the situation so in India. But the thing is, what I keep hearing from my friends and colleagues in India is that recently academic positions, at least at the level of postdoc and faculty, that has become much more attractive, financially speaking. At the level of PhD, I'm not sure what the current situation is, but if it is really coming in the way of basic subsistence, then I think this is worth considering. Yeah, one has to then supplement that somehow. Often what happens in countries like, let's say, in Europe, and also Rajarshi can chime in, he knows much better about the US scenario, is that the fellowships are sufficient, but also it's not uncommon for students to have, especially PhD students, to have some side jobs. Not in Luxembourg. In Luxembourg, I think it's structured in a way that it's a full contract and so on, but it was common that many of my fellow friends, when I was doing my PhD in Germany, they were supporting with tutorials and things to supplement their income, right? And why they were still doing it? Because they loved science so much, they thought that this is worth that extra bit. Huh? So I think this distinction has to be made, that being in science to increase your chances for UPSC, then it's a different thing, right? If you want to have this doctor title in front of you, which could enhance your chances for something else, then I think it's really not an academic motivation. Of course, it's a genuine motivation. If it does it, we have to do it. But as long as the motivation is academic, I think it should be possible to supplement it somehow. Now, coming to the second part of your question, Satyam, about where, leaving aside the financial part, but the scientific part, what are we doing with science in India? I think what I've seen so far is, recently it's changed. I should say the trend, you see more research labs which are publishing in so-called visible journals like Science and Nature, and the ones which are really well accepted and considered to be high impact by the community. But there is also one has to do a bit of a mental shift. And this has to do with a bit of how we are brought up in India, I think. So when I teach my students here, they start with the fact that they have to question their professor and not accept everything that the professor has said, right? So there is always this urge to question and cross-check and put forward their own, let's say, parallel analysis and so on. When I was growing up in India, we were told whatever the teacher says is correct. Of course, whatever the teacher says is correct most of the time. But I think it should not come at the cost of losing the ability to ask questions. One has to be careful here. By asking questions, I am not saying one has to be impolite, imprudent. One could still ask questions by being humble, and just to not to, let's say, be a bit indisciplined, but rather to develop the sense of questioning. We do not always have to accept what is being said, because if we keep doing it, we are just imbibing information passively. So once we move from a passive to an active phase would mean that you think and then you question, and only then new ideas will come. And this at a later stage also then reflects what you are doing scientifically. If it has been the case that as students, we have just passively kept on filling our brains and never questioned or never thought out of the box, then when we are, let's say, leading research labs or research groups, most likely what will happen, it's not that it happens in India, it happens everywhere. Most likely what will happen is that you're always in lookout for this one big breakthrough papers where someone in some part of the world did some, and you want to just do an incremental work based on that. Of course, this is not such a black and white, because one has to also adapt these based on the facilities which are there. And that facility could be experimental facility, it could be computational facility. But I think there's absolutely no doubt that when it comes to thinking, Indians are really at the top of the game. And if you look at the fraction of academicians who are in universities in any part of the world, a major fraction, it's from Asia, including India, right? Why it then happens that once they're back in India, this culture of thinking and leading rather than following tends to decay a bit. It could be that once people are back in India, the active collaborations with foreign universities, maybe that could be something where more support could be, or more opportunities could be encouraged, so that this culture of active learning continues, right? I hope this kind of addressed what the question you had asked.
Yes. Other questions, anybody?
Anupam, do you mind sharing your contact, your email, or ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just quickly put up.
If you can share it in chat, that would be great.
Yes, I will just send the link. Let me see.
Anupamda, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Before the question, actually, thanks very much for this very inspirational and tactical talk. Very much
tactical, yeah, thanks.
Tactical and inspirational. But now I have a question for, you showed one of your work slides, and the top, these were these 4 videos.
Right, yes.
Form and function, and in the top left corner you have the is it a simulation of the microbe growing, or is this the real structure?
No, these are real. These are real.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
that's very interesting.
So these
Okay.
are, we do a lot of simulations, but all our simulation and numerics are based on data that we generate.
Right.
So we have a array of different imaging techniques.
Yes, I saw on your website, and now I see we should talk more about what, like, I would like to
Sure,
know.
and I think you are not too far, so you are welcome to visit anytime. And this invitation goes to everyone, irrespective of which part of the world you are, either Europe or elsewhere. And if you are interested to visit my team, my lab, we'll be very happy to host you, and you can spend some time here.
Thanks.
So Anupam, this is on the lighter note.
Okay, Rajeshi, I got your message. Yeah. I got your, okay, wonderful.
You should start tapping Vidyapit talent in physics, chemistry, biology. No?
Vidyapit students are so talented, they won't come to me. They will go to Harvard, MIT.
So we are expecting quite a few Nobel Prize winners from Vidyapit under your guidance. No, on the serious note, if we need more people in science, at least in India, so you are a good inspiration for them. Pratyush यहाँ पर है, और तुम हो, and who else in this? No, you two are here on the research side.
With a rider, what Anupam said is very true. The gestation period can be tough. Once you make it, it's really nice, but it can make you go through the grind. And well, you have to be ready, because the thing is that you're looking for something that's not in your hand. It's determined by something else. And this is the ethics part of what he is saying. And this thing that there are so many papers retracted, it can seem very enticing that you can try to fabricate and get there, but there are people watching everything that you are doing, every little thing. You cannot get away from it at all.
Right. And
so,
sometimes these papers are detected 5-7 years after. In fact, if I am not mistaken, the Bill Gates Foundation has a dedicated part of their funding mechanism, which just does the job of reproducing past results.
Because
and I
this
think
problem is actually, it's very big.
Right.
It's much
and
bigger than we
it becomes
anticipate.
very important. Okay, for fundamental science, one could ask, okay, maybe it's not directly influencing human life, not immediately, but there are so many very high profile projects and grants, let's say on cancer, on environment, on ecology, which have immediate high stake impact on human health, society. And if these things are happening there, then I think that's the start of a major
disaster.
collapse. Yes. Yeah. But I think those of you who are here, or eventually who see this, you should also get in touch with Pratyush, because Pratyush has a brilliant track record, and he is living these final stages now. And I think he will have lots to share in coming days, months, years ahead of him. So
thanks, Anupam. But yes.
So. Bimal, I see you. How are you, Bimal?
Fine, I'm fine. बहुत अच्छा लगा तेरा लेक्चर सुनकर.
Thanks. इम्फाल में हो?
हाँ, इम्फाल में.
Okay. So do we have anyone from here aside Pratyush who are in the academic, let's say, trajectory, in some point on the trajectory?
I am. I would be pursuing PhD maybe someday, but not in science. More in social sciences.
Sure. But also, like, PhDs, again, one could do it alongside other activities, right? And I think that's the more common way in India. So when I was a child, when I was in Vidyapit, we had a neighbor. Imagine, I'm talking about 25, 30 years back. At that time, she was a female pursuing a PhD in mathematics, and from a place which is not like a big city in Calcutta. And she was doing it because she was a mother and she had a job, but she still wanted to do this. And I think this was somehow intrinsically quite an inspiration for me, because with all her constraints and all her responsibilities, she still was pursuing this. Of course, at that time when I was growing up, I did not know what it is and all. But later on, when I reflected upon, now that we speak about gender equality and emancipation and all, and I think she's a glowing example of that, that she was able to do it under those circumstances 30 years back, PhD in mathematics. It took her long, but she pulled it off, so which was a great inspiration. So Prakashda, I see. Hello, Prakashda. I see you are a life coach and counselor. I will be very happy to learn a bit more about what you are doing.
Oh, I was just silent and learning many things from you, being
No,
from
no, Dada.
non-science.
No.
Prakash is our next speaker next Saturday, so you can join in next Saturday. So.
Okay.
Okay, one thing interesting, I was just pondering, being from some history and you also know psychology background, that when you were talking about the scientific temperament and the questioning, so earlier in our, right from the Vedic period, even in Atharva Veda, which is a chants of many magical formula for, when it is 2000 or 3000 BC.
Right.
Even it was not written. The Sanskrit was always spoken and carried from, generation to generation through oral tradition. Right from Atharva Veda to Patanjali Yoga. So many of the when you know about these things in Vedic literature, not and Upanishad also, some sense of inquiry which Vivekananda,
absolutely,
what we are, it is a type of scientific and philosophical both mixed, and our existence, the Aryabhatta, the zero and infinity, and the sun, we are going around the sun when the whole Europe was arguing something different. So I was just wondering, when the Indians, at what age they lost this temperament, this scientific and this type of questioning? Since in ancient Indian traditions and Sanskrit, and particularly the ancient Indian history, we learn a lot of things in which the Guru and the Sishya parampara, there was rigorous discipline. For 12 years they were together, they were making inquiry, they were learning Vedas.
True.
And they were also questioning, like Nachiketa question, and there are many other questions. And Sankaracharya questioning each other, and from question the evidence emerged. It was philosophical thing. So when do we lost this scientific temperament? And it took British 200 years, and with modern science and education, that we have again we have to relearn it. So I was just pondering since
that's a very interesting point. So because if you see before the war, let's say around the time when we got our independence, India still, we had some internationally renowned scientists, people who have worked with Einstein and so on, and some of whose names we still discuss in physics and mathematics and so on. I think, like Swamiji said, we have this potential in everyone, but it's not manifested. And partly because this manifestation is has degraded a bit, maybe because of the stressful environment we all are in today. Maybe it's a fallout of the modern, let's say, because what I've seen also as a student, we could, I think Riteshda can tell, also in Vidyapit,
Yes, yes.
if someone was a bit inquisitive, would ask, there was a chance that he would be branded as Telu.
Yes.
Maharaj ko tel
Yes.
mara, right? So there is a peer pressure element there, even if you're genuinely interested. But some also exploit that to gain benefits. And that is one aspect which kind of does not serve the purpose. But the second thing is, this relates to us a bit with shortcuts to success, let's say.
Yes, I agree.
If we aim, let's say, if we have defined a career goal, like an end career goal for ourselves, I think most likely we will like to find the shortest path.
Yes.
And whenever we are taking the shortest path, we would most likely avoid any question which could act as a little distraction, or even if it is a more holistic way to, study the subject. And maybe that's also a reason why this competitive, stressful environment where everyone is looking for the shortest path to their dream job could be coming at a cost of the ability or the tendency to question, because you also do not want, by questioning, you do not want to upset your line manager or your superior, because sometimes it could be interpreted as imprudence by the superior. Oh, why are you questioning what I'm saying? And this is one thing I learned very early on during my PhD here, something I could not imagine any of my professors back in India would say. So I was in the second month of my PhD, and in Max Planck Institute, we used to have these monthly meeting where the PhD advisors will give an update on what the PhD students are doing, right? And this was very nice because you see how big scientists talk, but you also, as students, you are getting a lot of insights into how to handle questions and so on. And then my advisor was speaking about one of my early results in the topic I was working with, and we had no clue at the time. And there was another professor who asked my advisor, hey, what are we actually seeing? It's not, I don't understand much. And I was pretty surprised when my advisor just with a very calm face said, oh, I don't know, but I think Anupam will find it out by the end of his PhD. I could not, that was a very refreshing experience for me, because back home when I was growing up in India, I could have not imagined even me saying, oh, I do not have an answer. Even if I would not have an answer, I would try to make an answer, right? That's how we tend to do back home. But here, this was very, very clean. It's absolutely fine to not know something, because by acknowledging that, only then you know something, right?
Yes.
And if that culture is developed, that we are not judged whether we know this thing or not. Everyone knows something, everyone doesn't know something, right? And as long as that culture is missing a bit in the academic setting, we all are scared to open our mouth. And the only time we open our mouth is when we have to pretend to be pedantic, which is not really serving the purpose of academia, I think.
Yes, I agree, Anupam. So your subject was very new to me, so I learned a lot. Thank you for taking
Thanks,
such
Prakashda.
insightful section. And the other thing we were just discussing is that I am seeing in my counseling practice here every day that this type of taking shortcut to success, and we call immediate gratification in place of delayed gratification. That is very one of the important psychological facts. So what is happening that people are setting targets which is beyond that and beyond that time frame. It means they want to shorten the process. Suppose you are taking a regular courses, one of them at the same time they are doing distance mode education, one of the students who visited. So it is generating a lot of stress in the line, not only in science but all the things. But one thing is true, that due to our being developing economic and this pressure of economic insecurity and this loss of jobs, lack of jobs, so this is inbuilt in the Indian system, and we are still a transitional society. So whether it is a scientific research or in non-science subjects, research is a very patience game of patience and delayed gratification, which I am seeing in your career graph. So you were not immediately asking from gratification that you will get the result. It means only on survival mode and something more. So you will enjoy the fruits later. But I think it depends upon the culture, country, and the economic context of the family also. Family also plays an important part.
Absolutely, Prakasha. Yeah.
And thank you very much for opening new doors of science for us in non-science people. We are not academic science.
I would love to, because you are in the life coach section, and I would love to also learn a bit more. I'm looking forward then to your talk next week, because you see, when you look at, I think part of it is also the technology. These days you have message and text and WhatsApp and so on. Everything is immediate, right? Everything is instant noodle. How can you think you will get into a stable career if your career is also instant?
Yeah.
Right. Of course, you should have your eyes on the prize, but one has to keep options open. But what you really feel deep within, I think, even if it takes a bit of time, it will be more satisfying. I think, isn't it what Sri Krishna told Arjuna, that what is your dharma, you should follow, even if it is, let's say, out of two dharmas, one which is your swadharma, you should follow rather than the other dharmic thing. And that kind of, one could interpret it in this way, right? If you're really, whatever is the career goal, and maybe there is something more tempting, but if this is something you really feel in your heart, in the long term, maybe most likely this would be more rewarding than something which you just bounce upon more instinctively, let's say.
True.
So,
thanks.
Thanks. So where are you, Prakasha? Where are you?
I am based in Patna, my native place.
Patna. Okay. I see there are two hands, Vikas and Sanjeev.
Yeah, Anupam, good evening. This is Vikas.
Hello, Vikas.
I wanted to ask one question.
Yes.
By PhD, I mean that it is about finding something new. So when we start, we do not know whether we will get the conclusion or not. It is like we have some thought that we will find that, but we may not also we may not get the conclusion. So how do you keep that presence? Like we have our peer pressure also, and the society also, who all makes like this job a little bit more tough. So how do you keep that like patience and
very
keep
nice
going with
question,
that?
because are you doing your PhD now?
No, we are not doing PhD, but I think this question relates to many other things. Like
absolutely,
like, there are many aspects of our life which are like PhDs. So
right. No, because this is another thing which I forgot to mention. By doing a PhD, you are not only getting a doctorate degree, but you are learning some, let's say, life hacks, if I may put it this way, because, and this exactly relates to the question you asked, because PhD, you get into an unknown territory without any fixed end goal. And so that is naturally a recipe for a lot of insecurity. And how do you handle that? And the reason, of course, one has to be a bit insecure in the sense that so that you are attentive, you are, you say ekagrata in Bengali, that you have your eyes on the prize. But the benefit of that ekagrata is that when you are doing that nicely, when you are doing that to the fullest of your ability, even if you end your, even if you reach or do not reach your initial expectations, there will be number of parallel outcomes which will come in the way. And these outcomes will be sufficient, if I talk in terms of PhD, that will be sufficient for you to have enough material which you could use and defend your PhD. So the nice thing about the academic landscape is that as a scientist, you always start with a hypothesis, right? No PhD advisor or no scientist will tell you that you have to prove the hypothesis. It's equally acceptable if the hypothesis is also not proved. So no one will take you to the court or punish you if you are not proving the hypothesis you are starting off with. Even if the hypothesis is not proved, that's also a result in academia. Of course, in life, one has to look into the implications of that. But most likely, if you have a working philosophy where you know you are giving your best, you know overall you have this overarching goal, if you are progressing towards it with the right earnestness, along the way, there will be so many different outcomes which collectively should be sufficient to support your case, even if you are not exactly getting to that end goal. So that's why this fear has to go. And the reason the fear has to go is otherwise you are not able to give your full heart and mind towards it. There's always this nagging pull, which is stopping you from giving your best, and that is not desired. Right?
Thank you, Anupam. Yeah, I get your point that like we should have that sort of mindset that we do not question like whether we will get the end goal or not. I think this should be our mind.
And this is, I think, it's not my answer. Again, it goes back to what Lord Krishna said. No, of course, one has to then adapt it with a bit in our current times, but generally in anything, in any sphere, you see, if you are working hard, if you are committed, if you are earnest, people also see that you are a hardworking person. So they take note of it. By people, I mean people who could help you, people who could open doors for you for future opportunities, right? So you are, even if you think no one is observing, but everyone is observing, right? So.
Thank you, Anupam.
Thanks, Vikas. Yeah, Sanjeev, I think you had you have a raised hand.
Yeah, Anupam.
बोलिए.
I must say, मैं हूँ, तुम हो मेरे डिसेंडेंट और प्रकाश दा मेरे पूर्वज. 92 में के बाद तुम लोग आए हो, मैं 92 में निकला.
Okay.
तीन सवाल था. वन बाय वन पूछता हूँ, खाली सवाल का टॉपिक. एक तो था रिगार्डिंग इंडिपेंडेंट साइंटिस्ट थ्योरेटिकल फिजिक्स में. दूसरा है रिगार्डिंग गट बायोम, और तीसरा है जस्ट मैं उस पॉइंट को जो अभी बता रहे थे प्रकाश दा, उसको जस्ट एक इंटरेस्टिंग एपिसोड बताना चाहता हूँ, और वो जो तुमने बताया उससे भी रिलेट करता है. सो व्हाट आई एम सेइंग इज, सिंस इन साइंस यू आर डूइंग, पहला वाला चीज मैं बता के उसके बाद क्वेश्चन को पूछता हूँ. वो जो है कि बताया ना कि you do collaborative work, lots of work is done in collaboration with different disciplines. तो ये वाला बहुत important story है, और उसको हम रूपक फॉर्म में ले सकते हैं, not in form of as it is.
it is said that Vasampayan जो थे वो ऋषि थे, and he had a disciple named Yagyavalka who was very brilliant, but he was also arrogant about his knowledge, and he once insulted one of his disciples. So as a punishment, he was told that you should give back whatever I have taught you, and therefore, in anger, he vomited everything.
Yeah.
And the birds took that away, and whatever that was vomited, that became Krishna Yajurved.
Right.
And then he again meditated for so many years, and from that he produced Sukla Yajurved, that white Yajurved.
He worshipped the sun god, no?
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. I mean, Sukla and Yajurved, there are several meanings. One is black, one is white. There can be several interpretations. I am not going to that. What I am going into is this, that some of the lessons that we get is, first, for collaborative work, you need a time of temperament and attitude that you don't rub each other in a wrong way. So you should not insult each other. Even if you may be a brilliant scientist, you can be a lone scientist, but in a team, in collaborative work, you have to learn the skill of working together. Second thing is, if you have to keep the fire burning, keep that knowledge never ending through generations, you have to have this thing of parampara. So Kathopanishad is from that, and Isaupanishad is from White. Second part is, he meditated for 7 years and produced a different new thing. So what you said about asking questions, and even if you for some reason incense your seniors, you can do through your independent capability, you can discover new things. So that is just about summing up things about what you said, and from modern context, and from what Prakash also said. Now the question is about, one by one I will ask, and the two questions are there. One is, in case of experimental physics, for example, the way J.C. Bose did, or maybe Raman, in that cases, I'm not saying, because you need lots of instruments and so much of training in setting up the lab. But in case of theoretical physics, suppose I take my personal case, I am semi-retired in the sense that I am back to my hometown, and I have always had interest in physics, and for some reason I pursued mechanical engineering, but I still have that interest. So you can say specifically for persons like me who still has interest in physics and at least a few years of capability to use the mind and not have dementia, how do you suggest to go ahead in theoretical physics? I know in that I don't know. I assume that in practical physics, it would be a tall task working independently and all and all. But in theoretical physics, I think it could be possible. And then I will go for second question, but if you answer that, then I will ask for Gatpoem.
Sure. Yeah. So depends also then on in at what level you are thinking of working in, because especially in theoretical physics, there are so many open problems which are there. I think there is a list of, let's say, 10 unsolved questions in fundamental physics, which people are trying to address. So one could start at the level, of course, then that means there are a lot of big minds which are looking to solve this problem. But I think, I do not know exactly at what stage it is for you, but if I understood correctly, you trained yourself in mechanical or in engineering, but you have the fire of, you have the interest in physics. I think a good starting point would be to go back to where you had left physics, and specifically in that part, there are so many open questions. And these days we are very lucky to have online resources which discusses these, let's say, the key unsolved problems. I do not know, Sanjeev, pardon my ignorance, but you already did your PhD? No. Okay.
I simply did my BE, and I'm not interested much in pursuing academics formally.
Right.
It's a matter of interest, and I deeply I'm inspired by people like Raman and J.C. Bose. That's it. I mean, it's just something like could be childish, but it hasn't left me ever.
No. I think this is how scientists used to be. 20, 30 years back. Now we are becoming a bit more structured and formal. But maybe one practical way forward would be, let's say, since you're back in your hometown, and if there is a university in the hometown where there's a thriving physics department, and if you can, like we used to say, Sadhu Shango instead of Sadhu Shango, Professor Shango, if you can set that up, that would be one way. Or in your family, if there is someone who is in the field, they could, you know, provide you with the right questions, especially in case of theoretical physics. But also, if you wish, I would be happy to stay in touch and follow up with more specific questions and details you might be interested in, pursuing. So,
further questioning on this would not be much appreciated by others because it's very specific.
Yeah.
The second is a more general question, and I think it has implications for all of us. It is about the gut biome. I have been studying this for last 2 years, not 2 years, since last August last year. And I am very much convinced from my own experience and from certain readings that the gut biome has a lot to offer in terms of preventive health. And personally also in many cases, at least in case of one of the fermented product, curd, I have always noticed that whatever I eat in trains or in other unhygienic places also, if I have taken curd, it could be because of belief maybe, but I have seen that it always has helped me. And second thing is lots of diseases also have been shown to be cured in case of healthy gut biome, and antibiotics normally kill that. So my basic question is just curiosity, not question. It's a long project, only a query. I have heard that in our body we have trillions of bacteria, microbes, which are not human cells.
Right.
And I have also heard that human cells actually constitute only a fraction of the total number of cells that we call our body.
That's correct.
So my question is basically about, I will ask indirectly because of various reasons, the current trend of always trying to find a culprit microbe and going for killing it. Instead of that, if we can take the approach of strengthening our systems and assuming that out of millions and billions of microbes that are there, it's unrealistic to expect that we will kill any of them. It's better that we manage them by building our own biome system. So there are two questions. One is it true that, what percent of our body is human and what percent is some other microbes? And the second is, what do you have to say about the health aspects of gut biome?
Right. Let me start with saying I could not agree more with you when you say that we have to manage rather than eliminate. And that's the way forward. And that's what the most up-to-date scientific research suggests. As far as the numbers are concerned, again, I could follow it up. If I have your email ID, I could share some. There are a lot of trivia about microbes. There are different estimates by weight, by numbers. I think by numbers, it's at least, it's of the order of millions to trillions. So if you just look at the total number of bacterial cells, it's like orders of magnitude more. Huh? If it's in trillions, human cells are in millions, let's say. If you look at in terms of weight, I think almost 25, 30%. Again, do not please trust me on these numbers, but it's a significant portion of the weight, which is then also can be attributed to the microbes and the products that they generate on a daily basis, because they're also they're secreting a lot of chemicals and which are then used for human. But I have your email ID. Let me send you some very nice, there are some trivias. The second question, this is about the health and human gut. That was the question, right? The overall human health. Yes. And that's the reason why there are so many probiotic companies which are coming up now, which promise to restore the lost bacteria due to antibiotics and so on. So what antibiotics does is it does not discriminate between good and not so good bacteria, right? The interesting part, which we often miss, is that good and not so good bacteria, it's a very relative concept. What is a good bacteria could become a not so good bacteria if it is not in the right environment. Then we say that the bacteria has gone rogue. And I give you a very simple example. As a child, we were always encouraged to eat a lot of fibers. And it has been, now it's a word which is 5-7 years back, it has been directly shown that if you eat fiber-rich food, it maintains the mucus in the gut lining at a healthy state, and that maintains the health and physiology of the microbes which inhabit this environment. When we are not eating fiber-rich food, then some of these microbes, they become rogue. So they secrete some chemicals and they start to dig through the mucus and reach these underlying cell lines and create infections and ulcers and so on. So indeed, this is the case that we cannot really selectively choose what bacteria to eliminate and what not. And in fact, we should not even try to do that because they live in a community. Removing one member from a community, we really do not know what effect it will have on the other members of the community because they really depend on each other, chemically and physiologically. So this would be a very risky game. Instead, as far as possible, if this is managed through curd is a very good example because curd is very rich in certain bacteriotypes which are known to be good bacteria for the gut. And I think, of course, you have a belief, but some of the curd companies are exploiting this fact to commercialize their products based on the gut angle. So I think the science is already there on managing the bacteria rather than eliminating or selecting.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I will send you the trivia after the session.
And by the way, you remind of Nandita also.
Nandita, yes, Nandita.
Your smile and way of speaking, I mean, it looks like that. I mean, from distance, it looks like that.
I remember the first thing, Nandita, how he explained us what is force. No, what is energy. So in our batch, we had a very strong guy. His name was Chinglai, and he was from Manipur. And he was really strong. And Nandita comes to class, but Chinglai was also very naughty, right? And generally, he would be our go-to guy if you have to lift something or push something. And there were these window rods, and Nandita said, Chinglai, you come, push the rod. And Chinglai was pushing. It was a hot summer day, Chinglai was sweating. And Nandita then says, see, this guy is trying so hard, but no displacement. So he has done no work. And this guy was sweating like crazy, right? So Nandita in his own, this nuanced humor. So we didn't forget that, the difference between work and displacement. So Sanjeev, where are you now? Where is your hometown?
जहाँ से तुम लोग पैदा हुए हो as a student.
Okay. So the next one is not next week, but in 2 weeks, or for Prakash, when is it?
Prakash, the session is next Saturday. Usually it happens.
It's next Saturday. Okay.
Usually it happens alternate Saturdays, but this time we have 2 consecutive sessions.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I think we can wrap it up. Ritesh, you'd like to sum up the session, then we can close it down.
Thank you, Anupam, for this wonderful session. And I hope at least one of the objectives of the Adda is to cultivate or nurture the scientific temperament among that's very important to me. And I hope bringing together alumni like you who are in the thick of scientific world and particularly in research will be a good inspiration for many of us. And as you mentioned in the start of the session, that especially in Europe, we have lots of juniors coming who are doing very good work in the field of science, and some of them we have met. So I hope this Adda session will be an inspiration for many others to come. So thanks for taking your time and inspiring us. Coming to the attendance, the audience, thanks for their patience. I hope we learned a lot from this. And thanks to Satyam for planning, executing, and moderating this session flawlessly. And I think at the start of the session, Anupam complimented Satyam and the group for doing it very professionally. It wouldn't have been possible without Satyam and his team. Thank you very much. And I think that's it from me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ritesh, for reconnecting.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
I think you can finish the session and stop.
Okay.